All right, so little sanity check. I didn't really have a joke to start off with, but I had something that was just mildly funny. Last week we were talking about shepherds, under shepherds, sheepdogs, and this just happened to come back, and I thought, oh, that was funny. So next. So yeah, a cowboy in a rodeo, and a cowboy monkey. So true story, about 8 years ago, I was doing some consulting work in the Washington, D.C. area. I was working with one particular fellow. He was in a cubicle, and he had these monkeys on border collies in rodeos, like posted all over his cubicle wall. And I ignored it for a while, but eventually I was just like, I have to know why you have this here. And, you know, at first I had to, you know, wait and, you know, just, you know, see, all right, does he have sanity? And after a while, I was like, he seems like a pretty sane person. So I asked him, I was like, all right, what's the deal with the monkey cowboys? And he gave an answer I didn't expect. He said, well, to me, these rodeos actually happen. And as long as these rodeos are happening, I think civilization is doing pretty well. So this was his litmus test. This was his canary in the coal mine for how things are going, both, you know, economically, you know, do people have the disposable income to do this? You know, sociologically, politically, you know, do we have the freedoms to do this? And yeah, this is kind of one of the things that, you know, maybe only happens in America. And I appreciated it more during the pandemic and the lockdowns. And I think it's nice to just think that this, you know, we could see, I don't know if there's any of these going on, but we could see it. We're kind of getting back to that. So it was a more profound answer than I expected. Next. All right. So speaking of sheepdog, remember there, last week I sort of focused on the type of sheepdog that, you know, has that iron collar, can protect it from wolves. And I don't want to get too hung up on the wolves, but one of my purposes for this talk, one of the two main purposes, is I do want to have a defensive purpose to this talk. And of course, what do the wolves do? I think we could say that there's roughly 4 categories that we can expect the wolves to attack us on, namely God the Father or the triune God, God the Son, whether it's his humanity or his divinity, the written word of God, the scriptures, the Bible. Of course, there's at least 2 ways to attack that. One is just outright, yeah, we can't trust what it says. Another more subtle way is to redefine it. Let's reinterpret it. And you might hear the hiss of the serpent in the Garden of Eden saying, you know, did God really say that? And then, of course, where the rubber really meets the road is the bad news and the good news, the gospel being the good news. But it only makes sense with the bad news. So, you know, that one way to rip the rug out from under the good news is to water down the bad news and say, oh, yeah, we're sinners before a holy, righteous, perfectly righteous God. Well, let's water that down and say, well, no, we just have psychological problems. We don't have sin. You know, we haven't really offended him. He doesn't take offense. He's just a happy Santa Claus in the sky. Okay, next. Okay, the second purpose I have here is I want to foster an attitude of worship. I want to speak about God, and I want to do so in a way where hopefully we are driven to our knees, in our hearts at least, to worship God. And as you go into the sanctuary to worship God with your lips and with your heart, I'm hoping that this will fuel that, and hopefully we can see God in a slightly new way. Next. So my topic for today is your God is too small. Now, part 1. I don't want to be, I'm not trying to be offensive. I'm not trying to insult your God, your idea of God. But what I want to say, and I'm sure some of you know, I'm actually stealing the title of a book by J.B. Phillips from 1961. called Your God is Too Small. It's a book that has blessed many people. If you want a good thought-provoking book, it might be a good one to pick up. Now, I'm not going to steal any of his material. He has some great material. Next. So anyway, high recommendations for the book. I'm just using that as a springboard to go in a slightly different direction. But high recommendations. I'm not offending, I'm not trying to offend you. I am just saying that our God, our model of God in our imagination, because we're finite people and because God is infinite, this we can just always expect our idea of God to be too small. Imagine the greatest God you can imagine, and then imagine something even greater than that. It's still going to be too small. Next. All right, I want you to use your imagination. This shouldn't be too hard to imagine here in Texas. So you step out of your front door. It could even be the front door of this building, or maybe it's your home. You step out of the front door on a sunny summer day. The clouds part, the shade disappears. You start to feel the warmth on your arms. You feel the warmth on your face, and then it reaches your eyes. It's very bright, and what happens? So you react in some way. Either, bare minimum, you're going to squint, you're going to avert your eyes, you're going to shield your eyes. Something, the brilliance is just too great. Now, remember the golf ball. If we could say the sun were the size of the golf ball, and the Earth would be smaller than a grain of sand, right about, Ken, can you hold up that grain of sand that I gave you? Okay, there it is. There's the grain of sand. So the sun is about 11 feet away from the Earth, respectively. So with that in mind, next. So given that fact, the sun is anywhere from 91 to 95 million miles away. If we take our fastest rockets and send a probe to the sun, call up Elon Musk, say, hey, get us a probe to the sun. The fastest we could get it there is about 9 days. Traveling at the speed of light from the sun, it takes 8 minutes to go from the sun to Earth. So with that in mind, the sun being, God's flashlight, as some people, especially if you've been drunk and you had a hangover and you wake up the next morning with the sunlight, it's God's flashlight. So I saw you. So keeping that in mind, walk out the door, the sun, brilliant in its glory, blinding. With that in mind, what is going to happen when you behold the God that made that sun? Next. Good question to meditate on. That's kind of what prompted me to give this talk, was that entering into my mind and saying, wow, I hadn't thought of it quite that way. Of course, Psalm 8. When I look at your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have set in place. I like that. I like the picturesqueness of it all. When God created not just our earth, but the moon, the stars, the heavens, it's just the work of his fingers. Little finger work. Now, of course, I want to be careful here. This is just, picturesque language, metaphorical, analogical. God does not actually have fingers. Fingers are finite things. God does not have a fine finitude. So this is just, colorful language, and that's okay. It's to help, it's to accommodate our finitude, to help us understand. Next. All right, can you believe it has been 61 years since the first man went into space? Yuri Gagarin, 1961. So he's up in space. And what I really want to point out is he's somewhat famous for coming back to Earth and saying, yeah, I was up in space. I looked around for God. I didn't see him. Therefore, there's no God. And this actually got a lot of press. A lot of press, yeah. Yeah, this was like a vindication for the atheism that was baked into the, this Marxist implementation of the Soviet Union, baked into their politics. So what's the problem with that thing? Well, there's probably many, but one of them is his God was too small. His idea of God was too small. He was thinking that God is this entity that lives out, beyond the troposphere of the earth in outer space. And he looked around and he didn't see him, so boom, takes care of God, right? Next. All right, Carl Sagan, very influential physicist, who's inspired a lot of people to become physicists. He makes basically the exact same mistake on a higher, larger scale. Your God is too small for my universe. Bam, takes care of God, right? But really, what he's doing is the same thing. He doesn't understand the God of the Bible. His concept of God, or his concept of the Christian God, Judeo-Christian God, is too small. Next. All right, I'm not going to read all of this, but basically, you know what? Let's do it. So, expanding on that, how is it that hardly any major religion has looked at science and concluded, this is better than we thought? The universe is much bigger than our prophets said, grander, more subtle, more elegant. No, they don't do that. Instead, they say, my God is a little God, and I want him to stay that way. All right, obviously, he's not really talking about our God. He thinks he is. But anyway, I do want to say, let's make sure we don't commit that mistake of having too small of a God that fits inside of our little boxes, inside of our universe, that fits his conception of God. No, our God is way bigger. Next. So one way to respond to this is, look, the bigger the canvas of the painting is, the much bigger and grander of a painter you need. Similarly, just saying the same thing, the more amazing creation is, whether it's bigger, more complex, more amazing, the greater your need for a more amazing creator is. All right, so what does the Bible say about God? Many things. This one, I think, is particularly salient. Isaiah 66, the Lord says, heaven is my throne, the earth is my footstool. What is the house that you would build for me? In other words, you people, you can't build anything that'll contain me. I don't even fit in the heavens. I don't even fit in your universe. Yes, now don't get me wrong. God can reach into our universe and he can do whatever he wants with it anytime he wants. But he is outside the universe. The universe is like his throne that he sits on. Next. Oh yeah, and by the way, Stephen, actually, the first Christian martyr in Acts chapter 7, Stephen quotes that to the Jewish authorities who end up stoning him. Okay, so in this analogy, Yuri Gagarin, he just got off the footstool and got to the throne, and he's looking inside the throne for God, and he can't find it. Well, you're looking in the wrong place. Next. All right, so Solomon, when he's dedicating the first temple, amazing prayer, just amazing. And Solomon had wisdom, true wisdom. But will the God indeed dwell on the earth? So he just made a temple that we normally think, okay, a temple is where God can localize and manifest his or herself. And he's making it clear, yeah, we built a temple for the Lord, and kind of glory will take some residence here in the Holy of Holies. But he said, ultimately, this temple, as big as it is and as grand as it is, it's not going to fit God. Behold heaven and the heaven of heavens. So, the heavens, the first heaven will be like the sky, the troposphere where birds fly. The heaven of heavens, the second heaven is really the sky where the stars are, our universe. And then what Paul calls the third heaven is the abode of God and the angels, which I have built. Next. He continues his prayer, and he says to God, although this temple can't contain you, what I would ask is that when people pray here, when people come to the temple to pray, as people even do now at the Wailing Wall, Lord, will you give this a special ear, hear it and see it, that your eyes may be open towards this temple, hear. And a reminder, your dwelling place is in heaven. You don't dwell in this temple. It's, I don't know, one way to oversimplify it is I sort of think of like, if this is the plane between our world and God's, the Shekinah glory is a little bit like God sort of sticking his finger, if he had fingers. So, just sticking his little finger in, and then that's when you have, like on Mount Sinai, fire, smoke, and people are like, yeah, we don't even want to go near that. Moses, you go up there, we're not going. So that's what happens when, analogously speaking, God sticks his little pinky into our world. All right, so some big 25-cent words: transcendence, immanence, omnipresence. This comes into play here. Transcendence, all we're saying here is God transcends our universe. He's not inside the throne. He sits on the throne, and he can interact with our world anytime he wants. Immanence, we have to be careful here, because immanence means God is in the world, and that every Christian should be able to say, yes, in some way God is in this world. Omnipresence fits into that. Omnipresence and immanence are almost the same thing. So omnipresence, God is everywhere. He's in the heavens. He's at the bottom of the ocean. You can't get away from God. But remember Solomon's prayer, it was talking about, see this place, hear this, hear these prayers. So I want to be very careful with that. For example, when I knock on this pulpit, did I just touch God? Did I touch God's essence? No, this is not part of God. So I want to be careful there. When we say God is omnipresent, we don't mean that he is essentially inside this piece of wood or inside of you or inside of this. The creation is distinct from the creator, but in being omnipresent and being immanent, he can still be aware of everything, every word we say, every intention of our heart. Next. All right, so I like to think in pictures. So the painter and the painting. So in many ways, God is the painter, and our creation, including us and our created world, is the painting. And so we need to be careful when we say God is in the world. I mean, can we say that the painter is in the painting? Yeah, we can say that. I mean, it's an expression of his personality. So he's in there in that way. You could say his fingerprints are on it, his thumbprint, distinctives where you can say, yeah, I can tell that painter painted this one, not some other painter. Also, you can learn something about the painter from the painting. You can learn from the effects, use your mind, your reason, and reason your way back to truths about the cause of that effect. Next. In a similar way, when a computer programmer makes a program, sits down and writes it out, puts his or her intelligence into that program, the programmer is not inside the program. And yet, the programmer, once he or she starts the program, he can interact with the program anytime. He can interrupt the program in certain ways. He can even, anyway, you get the point. Next. Again, similar point, when the gardener is sustaining the garden, the gardener is not the garden. The gardener is outside the garden, but the gardener shapes the garden. The gardener has an end goal for the garden. The gardener pulls the weeds, gives it water, gives it fertilizer, mulch, etc. So these are all different facets of how we can say God is transcendent to our world. But in the same breath, let's not forget that he can reach in and fine-tune it whenever he wants. All right, shifting to neo-paganism. I wanted to bring this up because it's on the rise. It never disappeared, of course, but it's on the rise. And you got these bumper stickers like "Nature is my religion and the earth is my church." Nature is my religion and the earth is my temple, and nature is my church. No, I'm not saying it's bad to go fishing or go enjoy nature. I'm not saying that at all. But here we have confusion and the blurring of lines between the creator and the creation. And so that's just one example. Next. Where do they think the nature came from? That's a really good question. The great question. And you can ask them that. They won't have a good answer. Imagine that the best answer they would be able to give is that this thing called nature has just been around for eternity. That it wasn't created, it was uncreated. It's an eternal universe. And that's probably the best answer they could give. And then that brings up other questions. Yes.
I was reading something the other day about this, and there's like two arguments. There's scientific, cosmological. That is, like science says, if something exists, there is something that causes it. Science is always causing. Keep that. So in the cosmological argument, there had to be something cause whatever happened. Reading something, suppose we think it's nothing. Then there's the other that Carl Sagan was proposing. It gets in what they call quantum mechanics, but it's trying to get a law for the very tiniest element they can find. And it all hinges back in this argument to gravity. It says gravity is the basic cause of all we see. But you come right back in that and say what caused gravity.
Good points. Okay, so for those who couldn't hear, the gist of it is in mainstream science, you could say more Newtonian and even Einsteinian, there's a strong reliance on cause and effect. That's sort of one of the bases of things that underpin science. And there is a lot in science that even says, yeah, this universe that we live in, it did have a beginning point. But you point out that there's an abuse of quantum mechanics where they will actually question things like, do effects really need causes? Can things cause themselves? And here you go into Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland land. For that, I would say that and Stephen Hawking, he says that, well, if you can just give me gravity, start with gravity, I can build everything else to this universe. But you got to give me gravity. So if gravity was eternal, then we can make our way to this world. That's what they might say. But yeah, there's, okay, well, I'm not willing to give you gravity. All right, so I debated on whether to show this or not. I didn't want anybody to get too excited seeing the nudity. But anyway, part of the neo-paganism is a move back to the Mother Earth goddess. And I think this does a good job of depicting how creator and creation merge. Of course, or sustainer and creation merge. We can see the lines blurring. God becomes, where does God end? Where does the world begin? Next. All right, I'm not necessarily recommending this movie, but this movie came out, I think, 2009, Avatar. It's actually coming back to theaters next week. So if you were in the mood to see how, to date, it is still the highest grossing movie of all time. Yeah, so I wanted to bring it up because it is, it's an apologetic, it's evangelism for this worldview of the Mother Earth goddess. And yeah, the fact that it's the most popular movie ever, and the fact that it's coming back to theaters, and it's coming back because it's been so long since it was in theaters. They want to bring it back, make a few more bucks off of it, and then get people excited about the next episode, the Avatar 2, which is coming out, I think, in December. So I'm not really recommending this movie, but if you were of the type who wanted to say, keep your thumb on the culture, the pulse of the culture, and say, all right, how does this work? Why are so many people becoming neo-pagan? Why are so many people blurring the distinction between creator and creation? Watch this movie, and you'll see how they do a brilliant job of it. Next. All right, complex chart. Don't worry too much about it. It's ultimately very simple. I'll try to point out the simplicity of it. All right, so there's different worldviews, and by worldviews I mean, what's your mental model of the relationship of God and the world? Of course, with atheism, you just have the W. All you have is the world, the physical world, the material world. You just have the world. There is no God in that view. We all know that. Agnosticism, basically the same. You have the world, and then you have a question mark beside it. The agnostic may say, yeah, I don't know if there's something supernatural. I don't know if there's a God. Maybe there is, maybe there isn't. And some of them will even say, but you can't know, so I don't care. And so it's basically the same as atheism. Now, pantheism, which we typically associate with the early Greeks and the Hindus. Well, also Carl Sagan was actually technically a pantheist. Most people think of him as an atheist. He was a pantheist, in line with Albert Einstein, Baruch Spinoza. That's a tradition that's very strong in the scientific community. And one of the things I want to point out is, to me, there's really no difference between pantheism and atheism. Sure, the world is God, God is the world. That's their view. And I'm like, that's really what the atheists are saying. It's just the atheists dropped the word God. So it's really just a word game. All right, so I use kind of earth tones here to keep it down on the world level. And then I start to get bluer and bluer to indicate more transcendent, heavenly, sky-based colors. Let's skip to the other end of the spectrum. In deism, notice there's a big, thick line between God and the world. Pardon me. I'm good. Yeah, thanks. So there's a big, thick line where God doesn't cross that line. He can't, or just isn't interested in reaching into our world to monkey around with it. So that's one extreme view. Now, coming back this way, classical theism, which is what I'm recommending, and which has been the bedrock of Christianity in the Western world for the better part of 2,000 years, and which I think you can also see in the New Testament and the Old Testament. Here, there's a distinction between God and the world. They're separate, but the line isn't like super solid. God can still reach in and do whatever he wants. He can still be aware of us. He can still have a relationship with us. And in some future day, when we get our resurrection bodies, we can actually participate in his world, the eternal realm. All right, now here's where the lines start to blur. So if you're a sheepdog, put on that iron collar, because this is where it gets more subtle and dangerous. So neo-theism, where you can see there is a difference between God and the world, but it's a dotted line. It's very permeable. There's a lot of interplay back and forth. And this is becoming extremely popular in our churches, our divinity schools. And it's controversial. And then kind of going in the same direction, the world and God, total back and forth, where in this view called panentheism, which is also very popular, God is in the world is in God, but the lines are blurring in a way where, yeah, when I touch this pulpit, maybe I am touching God. There's some room for there. So those are some of the major categories. And I don't want to say, yeah, you shouldn't go fishing or you shouldn't go enjoy nature. Yes, we can and should. I think God has made it so we can enjoy nature, and I highly recommend it. When you get to that mountaintop and you survey the amazing stars up above and survey the land below, we should have a sense of wonder. We should have a powerful experience. I just want to say, but you're not experiencing God. Some people will say, I experienced God in nature. Well, let's be real careful with that language. Yeah, this is what God created. And yes, when you have those experiences in nature, you should glorify the creator, but not the creation. Next. Yeah, already made this point. When you're interacting with parts of the world, you're not interacting with the essential parts of God. So don't exchange, this is to use Paul's language in Romans 1, don't exchange the creation for the creator. All right, and speaking of Romans 1, there is Romans 1. I know it's hard to read, but it basically says the created world shows God's divine power. It should make it obvious to the point where no one has an excuse not to have some concept of a creator God. You know, even the world's most rabid atheists, there's no excuse for not believing in, you know, creation, intelligent design, sustainer, something like that.
What is this from?
This is Romans chapter 1 here, and then Psalm 19, which of course starts off, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the sky above proclaims his handiwork. I wanted to bring up Psalm 19, which fits in great with Romans 1, because we hit that before when we were talking about silver and gold. You know, verse 7, the law of the Lord is perfect, more desired than gold, even much fine gold. This is really interesting. Why is the psalmist talking about the law of the Lord in the second half of the paragraph? And he's talking about how the glory of God can be seen in the sky. Day to day, the sky, his handiwork, pours out speech and reveals knowledge. Speech, words, voice, words. So I'm gonna suggest here, this is controversial, that some people say it this way, that there are two books of Revelation. One is the book of nature. One is the book of the prophetic revelation. Now, I want to be careful there. It is controversial. And I suggest that it's sort of hinted to here. There are limits on what we can learn about God from the created world. But we, you know, God made us in his image. We have the ability to reason. We can reason from the effects we see back to the cause of those effects. And we can learn, and we can have some legitimate knowledge of God. And we can be held responsible for that too. Now, of course, the law of the Lord, which is God, you know, actually speaking in propositional, intelligible ways, we can learn quite a bit more from that. So, next. All right, I don't really know what angels look like. I just chose this one because it looks somewhat impressive. I've heard it suggested that most Christians, their concept of God is too small. That we basically think of God as the biggest angel. Okay, so, you know, like maybe we make this hierarchy of, okay, well, the seraphim are here, and then the cherubim are a greater class of angels. And then, you know, Lucifer was the most beautiful angel, maybe the most powerful angel, and then fell. And then God, well, God's bigger than Lucifer, so we'll put God up here. But he's still, you know, we often think of him as a finite being, something like, well, he's not an archangel, he's an archangel or something. Now, I think due to our limitations with finite minds, to some degree, it's just unavoidable for us to have too small of a God. But for the moment, let's stretch our minds and let's say, no. God doesn't fit in the category of angels, which are created beings. Lucifer was, you know, maybe Lucifer was the most amazing created being in the history of creation. But not in the same category as God. Next. So I sometimes wonder if we have a little bit of a hangover from our Greco-Roman background, you know, with the god Zeus. Zeus was the Greek name, Jupiter was the Roman name. And, you know, we see this when God is lampooned in certain ways. It's usually, you know, kind of an old guy with a white beard and, you know, hurling thunderbolts at people when they're bad. And this I think really comes from Greek mythology. This is an artist's rendition of a actual statue of Zeus, 43 feet tall, in a temple. And so I just want to say, you know, let's make sure that we don't have that carryover. Next. Here's Mount Olympus, of course, the Olympian gods, Zeus being the chief god of the Olympians. You know, Mount Olympus was a real place. And you know, if I were around in those days, I would be like, oh, you say that Zeus and the other gods are at the top of Mount Olympus? I'm going to go up there and look for them. It's climbable. You can definitely climb Mount Olympus, and you get to the top, and what are you going to find? Rock. Yeah, you're not going to find any gods. So the Greeks, naturally, as the Greeks became more and more philosophical, they very naturally created a problem that we still deal with today, another hangover, if you will. They say, oh, well, it's symbolic, you know. Mount Olympus is just sort of a symbol for our world, or there's a heavenly Mount Olympus that you can't see, that's sort of mirrors this in a different dimension, and that's where the gods really are. And of course, their gods are
Next.
sure. So, and their gods are not in the same category as our gods. They're finite. They're what some people call amplified humanity. You take just a person, multiply it by 10, there's your Greek god. This is not our God. And they, by the way, with the Greek gods, they also multiply the immorality and the wife stealing and murder and everything else with their gods. So no, let's cut all ties with that. Okay, stay there.
Oh,
Go back.
sorry. I don't know how to go back.
Oh, back button. Yeah.
Okay.
Cool. All right, Exodus chapter 3, possibly one of the most profound things in the Bible. This is something you can meditate on, and I'm not going to pretend that I've got it all figured out. I may sound like I do, but I don't. This is above my pay grade level. So the context is, Moses is supposed to go to Pharaoh. He's supposed to say, "Hey, let my people go on a little journey. We the Israelites who are your slaves want to go worship God on a mountain, near a mountain." And it's important for Moses to be able to have some authority with the Israelites. I mean, he's going to go up to the Israelites and say, "Hey, let's go." And they're going to be like, "Yeah, why are you telling us what to do?" So Moses asked, I think, what's a very reasonable question of God. He's speaking with God. God's telling him to do this. And he says, "All right, well, who should I say sent me?" And we might expect an answer like, "Oh, well, just tell him it's the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob," which would be true and good. But God surprises us. He says, what does he say his name is?
I am.
I am. I am that I am. And this is something we can meditate on all of our lives and probably never quite explore the depths fully on. And he says, "That is my name forever. And thus I am to be remembered throughout all generations." I think that includes us. Next. All right, so I don't have it all figured out, but I'm going to take a stab at it. So I am. I think that means he's the self-existent one. Nobody created God. God didn't need to be created. God has always existed, always will. God also is the being, the source of existence that gives everything else existence. Anything that exists, God gave it existence. So he's kind of, one way I think of it is he's the infinite existence, and he gives us and our parts of our world, he gives us a finite existence. So it's similar in one way to his existence, in fact that it's real, but it's also different. We have a different type of existence than he has. All right, so this drives me crazy. Almost every atheist makes this objection. He says, "All right, well, you're saying everything that exists had a cause. Well, therefore, what caused God? Because you're saying God exists. Well, who caused God? Who created God?" We've all heard this. It keeps coming back. Even the most latest crop of new atheists, they're saying the same type of thing. So when you have the Exodus 3 idea of God as the self-existent one, the question doesn't even make sense. It's just a bad question. It's kind of like asking, well, oh yeah, who created the uncreated creator of that which was created? It's like, come on, if they knew what they were saying. Or in a similar vein, which existing thing brought existence into existence? It's a category mistake. It's just like, yeah, you're just showing your ignorance. Now, okay, with this in mind, I want to encourage us all. Let's spend the rest of our lives pondering this, the self-existent being. And as you go to worship him, remember, this is not Zeus. This is not Jupiter. This is not Mother Earth. This is the giver of existence who who didn't need anyone else to give him existence. Okay, next point, go ahead and hit next. One interesting point about the I am is, even though there may be some translation difficulties from the Hebrew and some room for discussion, one thing that some people have claimed that I think has been discredited is that it could be translated as, I am becoming that which I am becoming. In other words, some people try to say, well, God is a changing being. God changes. And they will reinterpret that Exodus 3:14 to fit their view. And I don't think that's legitimate. I don't think if you get a bunch of Hebrew scholars together and say, is that legitimate? I think 9 out of 10 of them are going to be like, no, the grammar, the vocabulary doesn't allow it. So I want to talk about God's immutability, which is just, changelessness. God doesn't change. There's some Bible verses for this, yeah. So Malachi 3, I, the Lord, do not change. Next. Yeah, that's that clears it up. And we jump to the new, that clears it up. Thank you. Yeah, and how many times does something need to be in the Bible to be true? Well, it just so happens we'll jump to the New Testament here in James. I like this. Every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of the heavenly lights, who does not change like shifting shadows. Shifting shadows, change. I love how picturesque that is. So God doesn't do that. Next. Numbers 23. God is not a man that he should lie. How you meant like that? God is not a man that he should lie, or a son of man that he should change his mind. And then in context, the idea is if God said he's going to do something, you can expect it to happen. There's no 7-nation army that can prevent it from happening. So changelessness. God is immutable. He doesn't change. I think there's some good reason to believe that. Next. And I think there's something very reassuring about this. Think of all the changes in your lifetime. Overwhelming, right? Everything is changing. Just even the last 10 years. Change. It's unnerving. And yet I think there's something reassuring in the idea of a God who doesn't change. So that's something to meditate on. And think about this. If we believe in a God who changes, what does that do for your assurance of salvation? Well, God could just change his mind. Yeah, I had my son die for your sins. I used to think that was a big deal. I've changed my mind. That's not reassuring. Now, however, there are at least a couple places in the Bible where it says, and God changed his mind. Or maybe in the older translations, and God repented. So that's there, for instance, with Nineveh, God said, hey, Jonah, go tell them judgment's coming. To our surprise, Nineveh repents collectively. And God changes his mind. He doesn't give them the judgment. So is that a contradiction? Is there a logical contradiction in the Bible? Or is there a way to reconcile that? I'm going to suggest, and this is a controversial thing. There are people who will argue with me. I'm going to suggest that it's basically phenomenological language, and that this is okay. Like if I said, yeah, I got up early this morning and I watched the sunrise, you're not going to bat an eyelash on that. If I say, oh yeah, tonight I want to watch the sunset, that imagery works for us because from our perspective, the phenomenon is we're watching the horizon. We see the sunrise, we see the sunset. And it's okay to speak like that, even though technically, no, the sun isn't rising, the sun isn't setting. It's actually the earth turning in relation to the sun. We know that, but that's okay. So I'm going to suggest that that's just a matter of language. And it's okay for the Bible to use language like that. Next. Or think about this. 2 minutes, all right. So if I'm walking against the wind, I can say, yeah, the wind is against me. But then if I turn a 180 and I walk with the wind, I say the wind is with me. Well, what changed? Was it the wind? Was it me? Was it Nineveh that changed? Was it God that changed? Yeah, it was Nineveh that changed. Okay, so here's kind of a philosophical thought. If God is changing, we normally think of change against the backdrop of something that isn't changing. I see that car moving. Well, how do you know it's moving? Well, there's something behind it that's not moving. That's how I know that it's moving. So I want to be really careful here. If we say that God is changing, are we also saying that, oh, there's a greater, deeper reality that's more fundamental than God that's not changing? You know, the unchanging reality. And then if so, God is lesser than that reality. God becomes smaller. There's something greater than God. And I want to make sure we don't do that. Next. All right. So I just became aware of this creature, the Perusosaurus. I'm switching gears on you, just throwing you a curveball out left field or whatever. I just became aware of this beast. It's the largest known crocodilian. They don't exist at the moment, fortunately, as far as we know. And I was just thinking, you know, what if, you know, I mean, look at the size of that. And you can see that? That's a person to scale. That's a scaled, you know, 6 foot tall man. Yeah, exactly. So I just became aware of that yesterday, just happened upon it, and I was like, that's another reason I think, you know, our God is, you know, our version of God is too small. And just like, wow, look at that. In his sovereignty, he made it so that we don't have to compete with those. We can go swimming and not have to worry about those. Just a fun one. Next one. All right. This is the last slide. I just want to let you know, I do have a website, tthon.tech/nh for New Horizons. And that's kind of what it looks like. I do try to share out the slide decks as PDF files. So if you wanted to see the pictures, they should be there. And I also take the, yeah, thank you, Stacia, for making it possible. I also trim down the teaching. I try to put a video recording as well. Oh, questions? Comments? I'm going to rephrase it a little bit, but hopefully you still catch the spirit of it. The Old Testament is replete with stories about how the Israelites, the people of God, failed to keep God's law. God was telling them, here's what to do. And over, collectively speaking, they failed. Now, there was almost always there was a righteous remnant, a small minority that would repent and return to God's law, you know, destroy their idols, maintain justice in the land. So, but yeah, your point still stands because that was a small minority. That's like God's always starting over. The whole gets rotten, and you have to start over, and then it happens again and again. And so this also sort of fits into the question of, you know, people changing, and yeah, I think you make a good point. God does change the program. We're no longer under law. He's given us the Holy Spirit, and also there's a future. Ezekiel, I just forgot the chapter, but we read about it in Ezekiel, get hints of it in Jeremiah. Well, not hints, it's in Jeremiah too. That there will come a time where he'll do things differently. He's going to write the law on the hearts of the Israelites. And that'll be a game changer.